Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to the Comic Base Livestream. I am your host, Pete Bickford, as I believe this macro worked. Oh my goodness, the macro worked. Anyway, a perfect technical launch for probably the first time in history to the show. Anyway, welcome everyone. If you're thinking you're looking for the regular Comic Base Livestream, I'm sure that'll be along next week. Anyway, for the next hour or so, I'll be talking about all things comic base related. In particular, this week, we'll be talking about tracking your collection values and some of the broader implications of what that all means in terms of actually getting a real sense of what your collection is doing over time. We'll start with the mechanicals, but then we'll move into the philosophical discussions for as much as anyone has any appetite for that. I do have a few other questions stacked up from readers. We will get to them if we can, but more importantly, if anyone who's joining the show live right now, if you have things you'd like us to address, please put them in the chat to @ComicBaseTV, and I will hit as many of those as I possibly can after we get on with some other things. Before we get too far in, though, please, how's the sound for folks? Is two questions. First of all, did you at least get the intro music this time out? And is the sound more or less intelligible? So just thumbs up, thumbs down in the chat if you would. It'd be very helpful. I'll do a quick look there. Perfect. You don't count the 5 seconds of breathing before the video started. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I am woofing air, desperately trying to cope with the lack of desperately coping with pollen in the thing right now, and so I'm gasping for dear life. And Lizard Tech is just not getting it done. So apologize for that, guys, and we'll do what we can. All right. Probably another week of this before Tennessee finally gives me a break based on previous experience. But I'm actually going to turn my mic down ever so slightly because I'm probably a little bit hot. Let me back that off a little bit. Is that a little bit better? Okay, cool. All right, guys. Well, anyway, first of all, some brief comic-based news. If you guys were ever wondering why it is that we insist on knocking out the Atomic Avenue and comicbase.com servers at midnight to 3 in the morning on Tuesdays every so often, we finally were successful in getting our big database conversion switched over. In particular, we converted our SQL server to use UTF-8 encoding. If anyone knows or cares what that is, what it basically comes down to is when you guys get this week's update, you're finally going to be able to get all those fabulous diacriticals like the Macron over Von Baudet's, or actually Bodie's last name. We'll be getting the weird little squiggle over the C on various Turkish creators' names and so forth, and that all that will be now faithfully transmitted back and forth. All these characters that were once outside the set of the Windows Western character set are now they're ours to define. Matter of fact, every title from across the universe is now ours, and it took stupid. I mean, and I do mean stupid amounts of work to make this happen, but the thing is finally done, and I could not be more relieved. Other things that are going to be not coincidentally finally back working. The title publisher lists are back on the online website. So if you go to comicbase.com or atomicavenue.com, you're looking for all the list of all the titles that are carried by both systems, or wanting them sorted by publisher for some reason. We've actually had several requests for that. Those lists are now updated properly and they're linked in. Other things that are in the works are we are getting ready to push our new picture discs for the first quarter update. It looks like we are going to be north of 930,000 pictures on those this time out. We're just putting the final polish on cleaning up the picture library before we go in there. We don't want to if a cruft had worked their way into the system, we don't want to be bothering to try to compress that down as we torture a bunch of computers for the better part of 3-4 days of doing nothing but compressing picture files to get those onto the disks. Well, we want to make sure those are as clean as possible, so we'll probably start that whole process probably tomorrow night is when we should have zeroed out all our all our correction backlog and all our picture submission backlog. We'll clean up the picture library overnight. At that point, any of the folks out there, I'm sure if Andre's watching, you'll be happy to know that we'll have a clean version of the picture library to to roll from on that, and I expect to. I'm looking forward to a new edition of your picture catalog as well. That's quite the it's quite the thing to see what 930,000 pictures looks like in physical format. I forget how many tens of thousands of pages that thing stretched to, but that was crazy. All right, another thing that's in the works. If Walt Grogan is in the audience, I want to give you a shout out. A customer who put out a rather sensible suggestion the other day, where he pointed out that as our indexing for notes and storylines has gotten more and more thorough throughout the years, some of the things that were early assumptions that we did copy start making less sense as we go. One of them was when Copy started really in 1990, in its nascent format, we shipped the first commercial version in 1992. And back then, it was a really big deal when you had a storyline that ran more than one issue. And so it was really interesting to do things like trying to track all the acts of vengeance storylines, they were starting to have Batman titles. They were running the storyline, across two or three different titles, and it would, have 7 parts to it or something like that. And it was kind of neat to be able to say, like, okay, Detective Comics number, 668 is part 5 of, whatever, Trouble Over Gotham or whatever the thing is. And so we would always put those storylines on labels, and that was great when we were only had X many storylines. 30 years later now, we have stupid, and I do mean stupid amounts of data in the database. And some of the storylines, particularly when you're talking about things like anthologies, we might list 30 or 40 storylines for a given issue. And also, it's less interesting, I think, to just say that, okay, this is part 5 of Catwoman Invades Gotham or something, because issue 5 of the 5th series of Catwoman or something. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of neat to read on reports, but not necessarily something that would, sell me the comic book if I'm browsing through the bins at my local comic shop. So, between those two factors, I think we're probably going to, pull the trigger on, I think, like I say, a rather sensible feature request, which is to say, give me give me a separate control for whether or not I want to include the notes on printed labels and whether I want to include the storylines on printed labels. Used to be we'd put them both on there, and because we shrink them to fit on the label, the result is politely known as mouse print in many cases. So when you're getting down to 4, 5, maybe even 3 and 2-point type on these things, it gets a little silly. So I think we're probably going to have those as separate options on all the reports going forward. Probably even fit those into the next quarterly update. So if you guys have any fine points on that one you'd like to add to the discussion, please let's share them as we go right now. But if you guys don't have any objections to that, like I say, I think rather sensible suggestion. I think that's probably something we're going to see pretty quickly. All right. Other things going out. Speaking of the quarterly update, we do put out a massive update of Comic Base every quarter, which kind of rolls together everything we've been doing over the quarter into one big update. It is a required update in that it's going to prompt you to update your software before you update the next program, the next content. So look for that next couple of weeks, and it'll be the 23.2 will be the version number on that one, whatever the build numbers I couldn't say at this point. But look for that going forward, and there will be that and whatever other things we've done in the last quarter. We'll roll them up there, and you'll see as is always described to me, and when people call in for tech support, it's like, yeah, I got a big message that said that we had a bunch of stuff that was in the update, and I just didn't read any of it. And I clicked through it, and so my program's updated. So okay, all right. So that's about it. Anyway, before we get into things, quick say hi to everyone. Mike Beam, first year, welcome. Andre, of course you're here, and thank you again for keeping us on our toes with both the pictures and all the newspapers and everything else. Seems like Frank Calisaro is trying to give you a run for your money over at I forget where Frank's from, but he's sending a lot of British stuff right now. But and thank you to all the contributors who helped out so much on everything right there. But Andre, I think has got the record pretty well nailed out there for the top submitter for new content, because just about single-handedly put the newspaper category into effect there. So good job. Thomas B, welcome. Oro from Minneapolis, my old stopping grounds back when I was in high school. And apparently, after they tried to freeze you out, they're trying to wash everyone away. Stay safe. I guess we're headed for some heavy weather down our way coming forward. So, anyway, just everyone stay dry. Robbie wants to let me know there's no pollen in Toledo yet. Yeah, if only, if only. Fred Slaughter, welcome. Yes, Vancouver also getting fairly interesting in the weather-wise. Let's see what else is going on here. Larry's Library, welcome. And Thomas B. Gregory Hector, Mom, of course, is in the house. And Ed Billiard, as well as Ed, gosh, I forget, I think it's Ed Brito, but I forget which, you're in Canada, I believe, but if not, I stand corrected. But welcome, and all right, I think that is about it. Oh, and I'm getting Oro says you got no intro music on the thing. Interesting, because I'm really. Did everyone else not get right before we went live? Did everyone else not get sound on the intro? If so, then I'm really confused about what StreamYard is doing. Because although that might explain something else, but maybe there's something else going on with my routing. But I'm listening to it in what I thought was the program output in the headphones right now, and it sounded pretty good to me. But who knows? All right, Steve Dasger asks, can the info be used for value over time graph be reset? Mine isn't working like star new. Last 3 data points in the graph. Yes. I believe there's a way to do it. Let me do some research on that and get back to you. But yes, I do believe there's either a button to do the resetting of the value graph, or I'm at least think I've worked in some kind of hidden function for doing that. But let me do some investigation on that and get back to you. That is literally one of these questions I don't know off the top of my head. So just the fact that I wrote the program doesn't mean that I actually know how it works. As Steve could usually point out, because he usually is the person who can answer questions about how all this stuff works well better than I can. Greg says intro music sounds really, really faint. But voice sounds good. Oh, okay. Who knows? And everyone else is saying no intro music. Man, oh man. Oh, and Jeff says intro there, but really quiet. Good grief. I got nothing, guys. All right, man. Okay, I don't know. I'm probably going to have to just stage a fake live stream just so I can see what StreamYard is doing. I am using their automatic gain on this one right now. Maybe that's the source of my woes, because I'm listening to the program output, and man, it sounds fine to me. But we'll figure it out. Okay, well, guys, well, if you guys see a note that there's a test live stream in the next week, you'll know that I'm putzing with sound. All right, guys. Well, let's get to it. All right, so the original question came to me was, and let me go ahead and clear comments down here for a bit. Original question was sent to me, by users that go, well, how do I see items that have gone up in value? And that is a question that is so interesting because it has so many layers. It's like one of those ones you want to go back and forth with just to get, it's like, well, there's a lot of ways to approach that particular issue. And let's start with the basics on that one. Let me switch over to my, my demo computer over here, and let's go into it a little bit. Let me switch control over there so I can actually move the mouse around. All right, let's go to a title that has had some some kind of action going on it. Hey, not action. I want Action Comics, but let's see. All right. Okay, so let's start with this one here. Now, you might notice on some of these ones here, and yes, with the price on Action Comics, I'm actually going to make this column ever so slightly wider because you need it. As you're scrolling down here, you're going to see different colorings of different rows based on how things have done. None of these ones actually just prove that not everything in the world goes up all the time. You're showing blue, which in this case is for cold. Other things, let's see if we get some other ones that are going around here. Yeah, it looks like up there was a red one right here. So all right, and let me go ahead also and pull up, if I go to view here, and I'm going to say include value graph, which is really important for this stuff. All right, so let's get into it. All right, the comic base comes out of the box, and I'm assuming you're using either the Pro or the Archive right now because I'm going to be showing you some of the value histories on some of these ones. If you just got the Express version, then some of this early stuff isn't going to apply to you. But we'll get into showing you about how you can track your collection values going up and down as well. Just some of the more advanced aspects of this are limited to the Pro and the Archive because they have more of a historical basis of data than what's in just the basic version of the program. All right, so let's start with the start. So, for instance, if your database isn't showing it already, decent thing to do is go into the View menu over here and say Include Value Graph. Now, you might have noticed, just as I did right now, that the top part of your screen here got ever so slightly larger if it needed to show that graph. Now, you might know that you can, let me see if I got there's my magnifier. I can actually, if I zoom in right on this edge between the top graph and the bottom, it turns into a little up and down arrows. And so I can actually go and make this area up here as big or as little as I want it to be, up to the realms of the screen or the minimum I need to show data on the screen. But there is a magical point if I go down too far where it knows, hey, I haven't got room for that graph. At which point it's just going to turn off the graph just so it can show the rest of it. So if your screen is all, I think this is about as far up as it'll let me do, because I got to be able to show at least a basic amount of information about the comics. But if your screen is all the way up to the top here, you probably aren't seeing that graph. But if you go ahead and then say Include Value Graph, it'll pop it down to the minimum it has to be able to show the graph and the plus minus arrows under it and so forth. So that's worth doing because it'll give you first of all a quick overview of year by year what's been going on with the values of these different comic books. Now, one thing that's actually interesting about me, and this is you can tell this isn't staged, is not all comic books go up all the time. So for instance, Action Comics had an amazing run going up up and through COVID, and it looks like a great many of these just in the last year or two have cooled off a bit. There's some that are kind of treading water. Actually, I should know this by the other thing I'm about to tell you. But let me go back to action number one. Action number one is almost always set by what's the last thing that happened at either Comic Connect or Heritage or Christie's auction galleries. So don't take this as representative of the market as a whole. But here's how, for instance, the reprint of action number one, which came up from basically nothing to down to this third printing over here. It peaked last year, came down a bit. Now, let's talk about the pricing years a little bit here. So pricing years are a feature of the Pro and Up editions. We keep the last 4 years of data, so we know the current price. And the first time you download an update on January of this year, you notice that it took just that extra minute to do the update because what it did is it figured out, okay, we've rolled into a new year, so let's roll all the 2020 19 prices roll off, the 2020 the year two prices, which were 2020, then now become the year one prices. The 2021 prices become the year two prices, and so forth down to make room for the new 2023 prices. Now, we chose 4 years as our pricing because we had to choose something, and 4 was enough to give an interesting graph. We are looking eventually through the website, being able to provide history on every comic change that has happened ever. But that's not what we're going to, have through the program at any given point because, presumably, we've been rolling for 30 years. I can't keep on adding new fields to the database every year. I mean, your databases on your own computer would be absolutely massive if they were storing 30 million comic values, not to mention 60 million comic newspaper values for everything. You don't want your disk database to grow indefinitely, but it would be nice to be able to track as often as a price change happens, period, what the total number of price changes on any given issue are, and we track that every week. So through the website, I think it'd be interesting to be able to say, well, let's go to the 7th printing of Action Comics number one here and say, well, what are all the price changes you've got on that one for, to look at? And that's something we're looking to make possible going forward. We haven't It's not our number one priority, I'll admit, so but it is something that we are looking at doing. But I would like to be able to give that kind of history as things go, because things bounce around a lot, as you guys have seen as we go. Now, and this is a little bit subtle on my screen here, but you'll also see another, quick clue to what's been going up, what's going down, is that by default, the things that have been going down have got a blue coloring. The things that have been staying approximately the same have a black coloring, and the things that have been going up, and here for Action Comics, I have to scroll a little bit to get to one of those. I saw in just a second ago, I swear. Do, 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 do. There. Okay. So for instance, yeah, there's one right here. Um, so there's one right there in Action Comics 258, and that one continues to bounce way up as we go. And let's see here. Sorry, getting a flag on the play from the admin. I gotta see what that's about. Give me just a sec, gents. Oh, thank you for that. All right, I'm going to pull myself off the camera here because I'm getting a complaint that I'm obscuring the graph itself. Which, fair enough, guys. All right, so we'll put myself back on screen here in a minute. All right, but all right, getting back to life here. So by default, we also have coloring row by row of what happens, in the last year. Now, you'll notice the vast majority of these ones here are black. Why are they black? Is it because nothing changed last year? No, it's because nothing much has changed with these issues since December 31st of last year. Because remember, these get updated all year round, and it's the December 31st value that you're looking at when you're looking at what was last year's value. You're not looking at the January 1st, 2022 issue value here. When you're looking at the 2022, you're looking at what it was at the end of the year. And right now, there haven't been many months since the end of the year, which is why you're not seeing a lot of change on that one, particularly. But that will tend to, fill in more as we go. Now, let's look a little bit on the row coloring, because we gave you some new ways of. I'm going to go ahead and put myself back on screen here. Doesn't feel like we're just talking to a wall. We had some new options in the last couple of versions of Comic Base, which I would suggest are worth looking at. So, by default, the row coloring is it's almost like the old Wizard Price Guide, if you guys remember that one, where you had hot, cold, and just, whatever. So blue for cold, red for hot. Red, I think the threshold on red is it had to have gone up by more than 10% in the last year. If it just went up by a couple cents, it doesn't trigger red. Blue is if it went down at all. Otherwise, it's black. Now, you can get a more graduated look at all that if you pull up your preferences here. If I managed to tell me I didn't launch these off screen. Oh, there we are. Okay, great. Sorry about that, guys. I'm switching between a ton of different computers here right now. It's a little confusing even to me. All right, so if you look down at the bottom here of your preferences, and we added the item value change grid coloring. There's the classic, which is the hot and cold, which, was one of our more popular things, which no one understood. There's financial, which if you guys have like a Robinhood or a Fidelity account, you'll see that these are awfully familiar. Or you could say, hey, heck with it, just make everything black. I don't need your row coloring. You also can say whether you want to color just the price or whether you want to color the whole row. I personally find the whole row easier to spot, but it's all up to you. I'm going to switch this over to financial, so you get the shades of gain and loss. And what happens then is you get a little bit more data on this one here as to whether things went up a little bit, whether they went up a lot, or whether they fell. And those become on the fell. Watch out for that one, because it reverses the meaning of red if you switch to financial. Is because just like in your finances, red is bad, green is good. Deeper colors are better than looser colors and so forth. And here you'll see that you're starting to get some action even just talking about the last couple of weeks of update changes since the first. And so where once this was all a sea of black, now you're starting to see some different things. Let's go to, I wonder if we go to a more contemporary title, if things are going to look much different. Let's see, Superman, Man of Steel. What was it called? What was it called? God, let's just have a look. Okay, yeah. So I mean, so here's just a series from 2018, and already you see in the new year that we've already had some price difference on this one, and yes, on this one, like I say, not everything goes up all the time. We see that's how we're reporting actual market pricing as opposed to just running a price guide because no one who I'll give away the secret of for anyone who's has a feeling like I want to do a price guide. First of all, don't. It's a bad idea, but if you did ever feel like I really want to make a price guide with my life for anything as big as comic books, first of all, you'll be insane. But if you want to be very popular, the easiest way to do it is take everything in your database and I don't know, pick a random number between about 1 and 12% and make it so the default for the next year price is between 1 and 12% higher than last year's. You'll save yourself an enormous amount of work, and you'll generally have people who buy price guides will be happy with you because they'll always be left with this warm and comfortable feeling that like, hey, all my stuff went up. If you're doing what we do, this isn't great for your ego, but it's better for having a sense of what the market's doing. What we do is we just look at the market and say, well, what's the rolling average of what everything did? And as you can see, not everything goes up. And sometimes it goes up and then goes back down again. By the way, this curve, and let's look over here at this one, Man of Steel, second series, number 3, very, very typical of variance. Matter of fact, we get into the latter part of this whole thing where we talk about like, well, look, what would an investment strategy for comic books look like? Variance, all you got to do is make that curve much more angular and that you have a typical variant curve. So, which isn't to say there isn't money to be made in any investment where if you can gauge what the ups and the downs will be, you can absolutely, get someplace with that one. But I'm going to say what goes up high, what goes up strongly often goes down strongly. So just, we'll talk about that one at the end if anyone has an interest in it. All right, let me get back because I've been yapping for a while, and let me get back to main camera. All right, and comments from people as we've been going here. All right, so oh, Age in the Camp, hey, hell, here, dooba 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 doo. Wow, a lot of comments. Okay, no, Richard asks, "What about the Wizard Mag #1 SDCC variant?" Yeah, we that's. I'm gonna probably talk a little bit about that later on. That's one that falls into. I have many caveats to say about variants like that and the limits of what even we can do with pricing. But let's explore that one in a bit here, because I think there's a lot of layers on that one. Let's see. Okay, and yes, people are warning that yes, my face is right over the graph. We experiment with all different places of putting that little flying key with the graph, for the whole thing. But unfortunately, in this particular case, it's right over where the darn thing needs to be. Or it says, "Wow, after 30 years of issue data, we could all become comic quants, moving averages, floor ceilings, and yes, on them." Yeah, no kidding. That is actually one of the things that's actually most fun about comic base, or comics just in general. There's just so stupid amounts of data on the whole thing. Not to mention, like, I would love to see further levels of analysis of things like, all right, let's break out hot artists. Let's break out variant levels. Does the number of what's the stability factor as an investment go for as the number of variants increases for the whole thing? Does the overall volatility of the price price go up, down, sideways? What's its longevity and so forth? Honestly, I think these are questions that need analysis. They go beyond the sorts of things that you can easily do in comic base, but certainly if you're willing to do some mining on the data, I think these are questions that honestly, I think the industry needs to know. One of the things that was the most interesting that I've had to do recently was in cooperation with guys over Skitched. I forget the God. I'm embarrassing myself right now because I'm blanking on the name of the author. But when they approached us to say, well, can you give us some data on what is the percentage of variance over time? So in other words, go back through all the comics from all the periods. How has the percentage of variance changed? And it went from, in the 1930s, there were like 4 or 5 variants for the entire decade. They would be almost unintentional variants through price variance and some distribution variants that appeared in the 40s and stuff. And and this is all very low-level stuff until you hit the end of the '80s and the '90s, and then the line just went linear, especially as you go into it now, as far as how many variants are if you look at the year-by-year variant graph. And we've reached the point now where I think it's 77% of all comic books on the market are a variant of one sort or another. Or put another way, there's something like 3.78 different issues on average for every comic book. So for every issue you come out with, it has an average of 3.78 variations. Uh, Absolutely insane. But this is the kind of analysis I do think we need a lot more of. Um, yes, unfortunately, we'll have no long-term info on bagged versus unbagged. Yeah, that's another great question. Uh, I remember back in the early '90s when they started polybagging things, and originally you had to because they were going to put in a card, a sticker, an armband for Superman, and so forth, or it was a secret poster where you weren't going to be allowed to know which one it was until you opened it up. And the idea that they had in there is, well, let's put all this thing inside of a polyethylene bag, which obscures the whole thing, keeps it all together, and that way, no one will steal the stuff. Well, as it turns out, polyethylene breaks down relatively rapidly as these things go into it starts becoming acidic, and when the thing that's surrounding your comic books becomes acidic, it takes the paper with it. And so the advice for that Overstreet put out at the time, which I definitely believe in, is if you believe that you want to save the poly bag and keep it in its quote unquote pristine format. Well, the Overstreet price guide, the Overstreet price guide did something I think that was very brave and very positive for the industry. It's just, look, it shall be the policy of our guide that we will be grading the book and not the bag. There's, as long as the book has all the contents that came with it, we do not care about the bag. Feel free, if you want to save the bag, to slit it open, fold it up, stick it on the back, of the cardboard, and put the whole thing in there. But it shall be the policy of this guide to treat the book as near mint as long as all the stuff is there. And I think that saved the comic industry an enormous amount of hassle. Whereas I think otherwise we would be going where like the toy industry is right now, where you suddenly have separate price guides for whether the box is in such and such a condition, and any action figure that's taken out of the box is now it's almost known as a Lucy, but they have another name for it. But the action figure business is largely degraded into not scoring how the action figure is doing in terms of its preservation. It's scoring what condition the box is in. And thank God, Bob Overstreet, man, you did a real solid for the industry when you decided that was not going to be the position of you guys. So good on you for that, I'm just going to say. All right. Let's see what's going on here. Oh, dooba. Oh, yeah, but to just conclude Fred's point, but because the polybags, if anyone who left those on there, you basically are going to be degrading the paper on your book pretty quickly. So if you ever do open the darn thing up, you're going to find out it's turned to ash in about 40 years. So yeah, if you do love those books, a lot of them not worth loving, but if you do love them, I'd consider that whole keep it in the poly bag thing, but yeah, that's up to you guys. All right, so let's see here. All right, getting back to things. All right, so when I get a far field, man, I can really get there. All right, so let's go back to the camera here, and I believe, yes, all right, that actually at least worked relatively smoothly. All right. So talking about like, how do I know what's going up, what's going down? Well, like I say, the obvious thing is when you look at the prices, just year over year. If you have the Pro Edition, you can see what that's going on with that one. Even beyond that, though, CarPace gives you a number of tools that are very useful just for giving a sense of what's going on with your collection. The very first one that comes up every single time you download an update, you get an update report that says, look, for this week, just looking at the last set of values that changed, here's how many books you added or sold out of your collection, and here's how your collection's value changed based on the combination of the books you added or sold to it and the changes in the price guide inventory. You get that with a huge number, just to let you know right away how it's going. The other big, huge number that a lot of people don't pay enough attention to when you first start using CarPace is if I just want to know what my collection's worth, the number one place to go is go under File, go to Collection Statistics. It's going to grind for a second. And Of course, I'm demoing this on like a 4-year-old Mac running in emulation, so give it just a second here, folks. Yes, I used to, I'm gonna vamp for just a second. I used to have a much slicker, much more contemporary demo machine, but unfortunately, that one got used for another member of our office staff, and it's kinda hard to say like, "Hey, man, I can't give you a new computer. I need to use this as a demo machine." So it's like, okay, there you go. Alright. Oh, great, and this was the most useful thing ever. Yeah, it's like, "Oh, let me pull up a total on something," and of course, I'm using a database with no actual collection data in it, so well done me. Yes, because the data, I believe, unless I had a copy of my Livestream data in it, no, and of course I didn't. Darn it, darn it, darn it. Alright, complete demo fail, has to be at least one. Alright. I'm going to add a couple quantities here, but this is a stock database, which means that all the quantities were zero as you start out there. And if you multiply zero by any number whatsoever, it's going to come up as, you know it, zero. Anyway, so that's, of course, the database I started out with in front of you fine folks there. And now that I've added 4 issues to it, you see that now it's worth $15.49. All right, but in all seriousness, folks, if you're looking for the value of your collection, I start out here and just file collection statistics. It's so common to use this one that we even give its own shortcut key. Just use F12 on your keyboard, and that'll let you know how things are going. Especially suggest use this one if you're just starting to inventory a long collection, because it really does you a world of good to see that as you're going through all this slog of getting all the books entered and so forth in there, that you see this value steadily growing up. And it's just a good morale builder. Now you can break this one down by the entire collection. You can do it. You see your books, your comic books, your newspapers, magazines, whatever it is you collect. You can see it in different formats. You also can break it down by different ways. By publisher, by price, by whatever else. The sorts of breakdowns there are useful to you as you go. Now there's a couple other things you can do here. You can get a breakdown graph, and this one's very dull as a graph here. It turns out that 100% of the 4 comics I've entered are from DC, so it's the world's most boring pie chart on here. But if you were to go and sit there, excuse me just a moment, guys. Wow. Yeah, and that's what we get for downloading the latest Vonage update. Boy, oh boy, that was fun. Well, and I'll bet you that one came in loud and clear for folks. All right. All right. But yes, you can see how you can pie chart out. It's like how your collection pulls out over the years, over different publishers and so forth. It's a good way of looking how that goes. Another thing you can do if you have more than one data point, and this is the part that we're talking about on here, is you can see how your collection value has changed over time. So if you pull out this graph right over here, it's the little graph guy right there. It'll pull up your collection over time graph, and you can choose to see the value, the price, the cost, the items, so forth, and it'll track the trend line as you go. And like I say, Steve Dazinger asked at the top of the program, is there a way of resetting this graph? I'm virtually certain there is, but I'm going to have to look up how, because honestly, I don't remember just off the top of my head. But just if you want to just nuke your data back to nothing for whatever reason. Okay, so that is a quick way of just saying, okay, what's the collection worth? How's it changing over time? Another thing you can do, and you can access the report right from the weekly update report very quickly, or you can get to anytime here, is go up under report and check top gainers and losers is a very interesting one to say, of what went up and what went down just in this last week. Of the prices. So for instance, you could say, all right, for my whole collection here, do I want to see the top gainers by value, the biggest losers by value, top gainers by percentage, the biggest losers by percentage, and so forth? And how many do I want to show? You can show anything from your top 10 to your top 1,000 of the things that went up and down every week. And it's just interesting. Like I say, I can't prove, I'm not going to show this one off right now because it's being that this report had nothing in it right before I started the show. This is going to be the least interesting one you'll ever see. But if you've got your own copy of Counterbase in here, I definitely encourage you to pull that one up, especially after an update, because when it shows you that your collection changed in value by however many $100s or whatever else, and you didn't add or sell a lot of comic books during that time, it's a good question to ask yourself. Why? What changed in the market that made that difference? All right, let me go back to the chat here for a second here. Yes, that was my bat phone ringing, absolutely. And that's another thing that I learned I used to have this checklist when I first started, podcasting this whole thing. It was about 100 items long. Not really, it was like 38 items long. That would be all the things I had to check and set before going live on the screen. And one of them was to disable Vonage, which is the VoIP program we use here in the office, and set my phone to do not disturb. Guess which checklist I didn't pay any attention to at all this, before this today's show. So, like I say, professionalism, guys. That's the name of the game over here. All right. So let's get back to it here. Yes. Oh, and the agent of camp wants to point out that the top gainers and losers use near mint value and not your own copy. Yes, that is true. It's talking about when it's showing the value of what went up and down. It's showing what the near mint copy went up and down, not how much your copy went up and down. So that is worth pointing out. And can it use the condition you own of your own copy? There was a reason we weren't doing it, and I'm trying to recall what that reason was. But at the time when we were discussing the feature, it made a lot of sense to us. So before I go on the record and say that, oh yeah, it's a great idea, before I go on the record and say that, it's like, if you guys know what the deal is about Chesterton's fence, it's the old story, about of just being too careful before you change things on a whim, whether in society or anything else. It's a story G.K. Chesterton is credited with saying, a radical, which what they'd call anyone in England in the 1800s that wanted to change anything, would say, like, well, why don't we tear down this institution? It's terrible, it's broken. What else is it? Like, it's like you come across a fence, in the middle of in the middle of the grounds. And it's like, and a wise groundskeeper would say this to you. He would say, look, young man, when you can tell me what the purpose of that fence is, the one you say has no purpose, when you can tell me what the purpose is, because someone built that dang thing. Of course, G.K. Chesterton would never say dang. But if you can explain the purpose of why it was built, then we can discuss whether or not it should go. Anyway, so of a similar note, there was a reason that we decided to use the near mint price on that report versus your price. And when I can adequately recall what it was, then we'll talk about whether we want to change it. But yes, it didn't build itself, and there was a pretty good reason at the time. So it might have just had to do with the fact that I want to be able to talk about market conditions as a whole and not just your collection. But if that was all it was, and if we can handle all the boundary conditions, which is a fancy programmer term of saying, it's almost like the thing we talked about last week with the comic base cover gallery screensaver, is why is it that the cover gallery screensaver doesn't by default let you see your collection separately? Why is it showing all comic covers and not just your comics? And the answer is because out of the box it would be broken, because until you start entering books into the database, you have no comics. And so if the screensaver kicks in, it'd be like, I got nothing to show. That was largely the reason we didn't do it in the screensaver. Now, we addressed how to make it so that's possible, and to warn you as you're setting up the parameters to say, hey man, until you enter some comic book, I got nothing to show. And we felt like that we addressed that one adequately with that one. It could be very much the same idea when we did the report, is that we didn't want to make it so that, we talked about a whole bunch of things moving, but if your particular comics hadn't moved much, what, we're going to show a blank report? Don't know. But let me look into it. It's definitely worth looking into before I make a promise one way or another. Wow, that was the longest wheeling about on that whole thing I hope ever to go through. So I'll try to be more direct in future discussions. All right. So all right, I got to get down to business on the whole thing. So there's one other trick I want to show you, about just mechanicals of how to switch things about with your database, before I get into some of the touchier topics of really tracking value and what the limits are of what we can do and not do. The other mechanical thing I want to show you is, this is one of those cases where the advanced find is really, really powerful. So the advanced find, if you know it, if you were to go up here under, say, find, and say other, and then you go and say, what do you want to find? And again, this is relying on you having the Pro or better edition of Comic Base. This doesn't feature does not exist in the Express edition. But if you pull up Advanced Find, then this is our way of more or less giving you an SQL interface, which is, letting you just go straight into the nitty gritty of the raw data and play with it, as you will, with everything good and bad that comes with that, which means that it comes with a fair amount of complexity, but at the same time, it lets you do things that are not at all obvious how you would do it in any other way. Let me go ahead and zoom in on something what that is. So, for instance, one of the things you can do, and oh darn luck, of course, I didn't load this up on this machine. Well, I'll say this ahead of time. If you come up with a query that you'd like for instance, back in the day before we had a most valuable report in Counterbase, there was a way through Advanced Find to say, well, show me my top 200 most valuable comic books, and there was no other way to do that in the program until we added that in. Once you'd figured out how to do it once, you could then save your search, and then you say, "Oh, hey, I want to show my most valuable comic books." I just load up my most valuable comic search. In a typical way, I could say I had a search formulated. Unfortunately, I had on the other demo computer for your biggest gainers over a certain threshold. So, for instance, let's say I want to find, and I'm looking in comic books, all the comic books where, and I'm going to scroll down here, their value for 2023 is greater than their value, and let's go back 2 years ago just to make it interesting, times 1.2. All right. Now, if I do this, what I'm then saying by all this kind of weirdness here is I'm saying, show me everything where the current value is more than 20% higher. So 1.2 times the price it was 2 years ago. And I can order it by whatever direction and so forth. And that'll show me all the things that have gone up by an arbitrary amount. Oh, and Steve Daginger wants to remind everyone there's an advanced find guide on the Comic-Base forums. Absolutely check the link on that one. Steve has been invaluable resource on all things when you get into the database end of things. They do not call him Stealth DBA for nothing, but definitely check that out. But I can, so I can do things like saying, show me all the comics that have, risen, but after falling in the previous year. Show me all the things that are worth more than 50% of what they were worth last year. And so you can concoct these fairly obscure queries to your heart's content. And then what I would suggest once you've got them is go ahead and save them, and say gainers over 20%. Save that, and then when you want to get to it later, you can just load up the search and let it rip. And let's see if I go ahead and do this right now. Let's go ahead and bring some of these back. And by the way, you also can say, order them by how big the price is, by what the title is, whatever else. And and here's the first 1,000 things that have gone up dramatically in that time period and so forth. Not necessarily things you would think of. But anyway, so yeah, and note also that these are ones I asked for that are up over 2 years ago's price. So in other words, over January 31st of 2021, not from January 30, not over December 31st of 2021, not over December 31st of 2022, which is a high bar, which is why I didn't, do it because you're asking for what went up 20% in the last month, which, aren't going to be that many. So not every, the red coloring or the blue, the coloring you see right here of whether things went up or not, that's just whether it went up this year. So that one is comparing just against the end of last year. But if you want to go back further in the whole thing, yeah, you can definitely use that the Advanced Find to dig deeper into the data on that. So definitely have a look at that one and look into it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the limits of what can be known about comics. So a little while ago, I believe it was Richard Scott was asking a question about a particular variant that not sure the 100% of the story in this one. It was a relatively little known variant of a wizard price guide that somebody's moving on eBay for like crap ton of money, and but for which the price in comic base had not moved all that much. Not sure if that's still the situation, but it was the situation at the time when he was asking the question about that one. So, we talked at the beginning of the year. I had a 6 tips for for better collecting, followed by more of a philosophy show on how do you know what your collection is really worth. And one of the points I try to make in both of those ones here is the more you get to a one of a kind item, the least the less helpful any kind of price guide, expert friend in the field, whatever else, the less help for that's going to be. Um, for those of you who don't know how it works, Coinbase gets its pricing by more or less starting with what's the price right now, and then it rolls all the prices of things that have sold on Heritage Auctions and Atomic Avenue. It rolls all those together along with all the new listing prices on Atomic Avenue, which winds up being about 2.2 million data points that we're evaluating every week to say, well, what's the rolling average of that comic book now? And then there's the two bits of fine point on it is that someone listing it at a given price is considered, it's a vote for that price. Someone's actually selling it at a given price is more of a shove towards that price, but the shove has a limited duration. It only applies for 30 days. After that, it's old news. We don't care anymore that once upon a time it sold for that, but that was then. This is now, and so now it's what's the market saying going forward to. And then finally, there is a threshold of movement, at which point, if it goes way up or way down, we're going to ignore the data utterly unless we see a sufficient number of votes that say the same thing. And what that's meant to do is it can't just be that, say I've got The Adventures of Mighty Guy, #1. It's an indie comic I put out while I was in elementary school. And it's currently listed for $2 on Comic but darn it, I know this thing is worth a ton. So I'm saying I have, as it turns out, most of the world's supply of The Adventures of Mighty Guy, because I'm the only guy who has them. And I'm going to put them up for $1,000. That is not going to move the guide price of Adventures of Mighty Guy to $1,000 unless I actually start managing to sell some. As a matter of fact, I need to sell more than one because otherwise the data will be ignored as anomalous. If I sell one copy to my buddy and it comes down as an official sale for $1,000, see, look, I got $1,000 for it. There's the price, there's the sticker. That still doesn't move the price of The Adventures of Mighty Guy. Now, let's say somehow The Adventures of Mighty Guy gets optioned by the WB. It's going to become the new hot series starring, whatever the teen heartthrob of the day is. And so now Adventures of Mighty Guy is actually moving. And so now it's not one guy who says that this thing's worth $1,000. Now it's like 4 or 5 guys who say it's worth $1,000. Now suddenly this comic book is going to go from $2 to $1,000 or $950 very quickly. But it does that based on the idea that there's multiple data points which overcome what's called the crazy factor to get you there. Because otherwise you'd be able to make a market by just having a couple people shove the price around, say, hey, look, man, I really, 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 really wanted it, so I paid a crazy amount for it. Or maybe you could do the opposite thing. Like I got the deal of a lifetime, on The Adventures of Mighty Guy #1. It's like, everyone knows everywhere else this thing's going for $1,000. I got it for only 2, right? It could go either way. But you want to go by what does the market as a whole say. And by and large, what the market will say is, okay, well, it moved up and down a certain percentage of what it did last week. And then these things, you can go, especially when you see something get optioned or something like that, you can see these really heavy spikes. And usually when people will ask me, well, what's the story on, Adventures of, like our Batman animated series number blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't follow Batman animated series. And they're like, oh, hey, that was apparently the first appearance of Harley Quinn. And Comic Base will spike the price to high heavens, and I won't have heard about it at all. But the market told me, and so I'm like the last person to know on these things because the market will say. But yeah, for big market moves, it does require a lot of votes on the whole thing. So now, one of the pieces of advice I tried to give out when I was talking about that one is the closer you get to something that's one of a kind, the less useful something like Comic Base or frankly anything's going to be, because there's nothing to compare it to, and you're not going to have a base of market data to judge it against. So when you've got you know, again, if I have the one of a kind variant of, Adventures of Mighty Guy, or in this case, a particular magazine, if it turns out there are only two pieces of sales data to look at during that whole time period, then yeah, that's the sort of thing where we're going to be, we're not going to be super useful in terms of knowing that market. It's, we'll have had whatever our initial guess was, but we won't be able to adequately reflect whatever quirks there are going on if there's just no sales to go with it. But if the thing, so I mean, the closer it is to being one of a kind, the more you just got to use your own discretion. In that case, if you do have something that's one of a kind, and here's, I'll fold in as a bonus here. The answer to another question that I wanted to address last time I didn't get to is, what if I have, say, an autographed copy of an item? So I've got Stan Lee autographed my copy of The Adventures of Mighty Guy. I don't know why, because he didn't work on it, but he did. What you do with a case like that is, in that case, there's a feature in comic base called Lock Price, which I can show it over here. What you'll want to do is, and just to make this easy myself, he really, let's say he autographed my copy of the Man of Steel second series. Again, no idea why he did that, but I'm going to say autographed by Stan Lee. I cannot type it all. And Lee. All right. Autographed. Good Lord. Okay. I'm going to say autographed by Stan Lee. I'm going to leave it as whatever the edition is. I'm going to say, I think it's now worth, $450 or, $400. I'm going to double click on that sucker, and I'm going to go down here. I believe it's under other. And I'm going to say prevent update from changing price. This is the longish way. You can also find this under quick changes, just lock price, which you can also display in the grid if you want. But at that point, what that means is, look, it's $400. It's unique. This is my copy. There are none like it. In other words, the price guide, whatever your price guide says for the Man of Steel second series, it's going to be wrong because my copy is special. In which case, yeah, set it to the best of your ability. You will be a vote for that. It probably won't affect anyone else's copy because theirs is not autographed by Stan Lee. It's wildly out of difference from anyone else's copy. And so it's not going to feed back into the price mechanism of the whole thing, and the price mechanism won't feed back into you. So in other words, even if you say update my price guides with the latest values, for that particular issue, it's going to leave it alone. And so I'm going to say, yeah, if you have something that's literally unique, absolutely do that. But to the extent you have things that are almost unique, at that point, yeah, you really do need to, I wish it were otherwise, but the whole way that we can determine pricing is by having a fair amount of data to crunch on, and by being able to compute an average of what the market seems to be saying they'll give you for a particular comic book. And as anyone will tell you, whether you're selling a piece of art, a house, or whatever else, the whole market works really, really well. I mean, notice, like, let's say I'm selling my house. Everything the realtor is generally, the overwhelming type of realtor is going to try to beige out your house to the nth degree. They're going to try to make it the nicest version of your house that anyone would want. In other words, everything that's quirky about your house, they're going to try to remove from it. It starts by, changing the colors of your walls, any weird furnishings you've got, any personality. They'll take all the pictures of your family off the walls. The customer has to be able to imagine themselves in your space too. But they're going to try to make your thing that you're selling appeal to as many customers as they can possibly do, because their thought there is that if we have a whole bunch of people trying to buy it, then the market will bid itself up to the right price, and that's your price, right? Now, that could work with comic books too. I mean, it's pretty easy to sell a copy of Amazing Spider-Man number 183. I mean, there's a lot of them. The market, knows Amazing Spider-Man. They like it. It's of the right era, so there's a lot of interest in the whole thing. All you got to do at their point is have a nice copy of Amazing Spider-Man 183. It's not a big deal. If I'm selling a copy of, I don't know, Man of Steel 5th series, what series are they up to right now? Let's say I'm going to pick on Red Sonja versus Vampirella, right? Which I think they just did about 100 variants of. So I'm going to sell variant 79 of Red Sonja versus Vampirella. Well, at that point, I got a different thing on my hands. I get something that is absolutely, it is going to be unique, or at least it's going to be something that is very uncommon. It's, I'm just going to say it's the Eduardo Barreto cover that's sold by, Fried Pie Limited or whatever. I have no idea what the version 79 is. All I know is there's a hell of a lot of them. So now, what's my audience, right? My audience is everyone who likes comic books, who also likes Red Sonja and or Vampirella, who is collecting modern comics, who doesn't mind paying for a variant, right? They're not just looking for just any copy of the thing to read. They're looking to collect the variant that somehow wants that variant. It's at this point, man, I'm looking for a very specific buyer. Now that's can be good as long as the number of very specific buyers is at or just above the number of copies I've got to sell. I mean, if I don't, there might have been 75 copies printed of this issue. As long as there are 75 or more buyers for it, then you're golden. In which case, hopefully all you got to do is put that in front of those buyers and wait long enough, and eventually those people will find the thing and they'll pay what their heart says that thing is worth. You're not going to be able to determine that price very well algorithmically. I mean, it comes with a starting price. The starting price is often based, at least initially, on how many extra copies of the book you had to buy as a retailer in order to even be allowed to buy a copy of that edition. So if it's a 50-to-1 variant, it's going to come in much higher as an initial price than a 5-to-1 variant. But the thing to worry about on the other end of this stuff is, and I don't think you can ever discount this, is what if there are only 75 copies printed of this one, but there are 74 or less people who even want it, right? Who would pay anything more than the standard cover price for that issue. Because it turns out if you can't find those 74 people, then it'll turn out that someone's got a box of those things unsold, and they could be carrying a $50 or $100 price, but if they're not moving, what are they worth? And the answer is, and here I tend to be kind of hard ass about them. The answer is they are worth zero. I mean, I'm not 100% of the opinion on this one. I mean, there are people who absolutely disagree with me. I tend to think those people are called hoarders, but I mean, I think the fundamental thing when you go to determine the price on anything is the price of anything is how much can I sell it to somebody else for, right? And if I cannot sell it to somebody else, if there is literally nobody who wants it, no matter how fantastic I think the art is, no matter how fantastic some attribute this thing has, if I can't pass it along to the next guy and he won't get out his wallet and hand me money for it, then I have an asset that is worth zero. Worst case, it's an asset that's hard to store or carries with it certain costs, such as it has to stay refrigerated or it's very bulky or something like that. At which point, it's actually worth negative money to me. I would be better off throwing it away. And there's a frightening number of things in life that you'll encounter that you walk around to it, and it's something you had at the time. You were very sold on it. You treasured it, and you look at it 10 years later and say, like, what the hell is that doing there? I have not used it. I haven't thought about it in a decade. It's just taking up space. And then you look on eBay, see if I can get rid of it. And you might find two people who, hey, I've got one just like it for sale for $200. And I think the first sensible thing you would do is stick it on eBay for $200 and see if anyone bites. If that doesn't work, stick it on eBay for $100, see if anyone bites. But don't be too surprised, at least some of the time, if you could stick it on eBay for $1 and nobody bites. I mean, there are things in the world where it comes out, that your best move is to throw it away and get zero for it, because things can, like I say, things can also have negative value. It's not, you should never discount that. I mean, I'm a guy, so there's constantly big things I want, gosh, a ditch witch. Man, that would have really solved some problems for me on that one job at one point. Or, how about a trailer for hauling around my lawnmower and things like that, or a 2-ton pickup truck or whatever else. There are all sorts of big things I would like, which might solve a real problem for me once, but which for most of their life would actually wind up gathering rust and taking more trouble in my life than they're worth. We all have things like that, whether it's a favorite piece of clothing we liked once, that toy we really, really dug once upon a time, so forth. And what you're hoping for, at the very least, at the end of the day, is that you can pass it on to someone who wants it more than you do, so that you can get something out. But I'd say don't, always be careful, because the value going to zero, or just of people simply forgetting about it, is no, I mean, the more you make something unique, the more that becomes a non-negligible worry. So there is an upper bound, for instance, on the number of variants I could make about a comic book where anyone would care at all. If I made 10,000 variants of the Man of Steel #1, I think I would have a very difficult finding even the most completist who needed to have all 10,000. I mean, there is an upper bound, and the way we're going this comic market, we're going to find it. So, anyway, yeah, I'd say always watch out for the market clearing price. Don't get caught, holding on to something more, that you would like to get rid of, and then you suddenly realize there isn't someone to give it away to. If you were looking for just investment, the safest investment of all is something that where there's a very wide base of people who want it, and you just happen to have the nicest possible version of it. So, in other words, think about it with real estate, right? Everyone likes the nice, pristine, flat house with the master bedroom on the first level, with all the things that people go for, the granite countertops, where all the things your realtor or gushes over. Everyone would like that. If you just happen to have the nicest possible version of it, you will have no trouble getting your money from that investment. To the extent that you have a more unique investment, it doesn't mean it's not worth it. Matter of fact, if you have a very unique investment, but if you can find the buyer for it, that might be a match made in heaven. You might be finding the one guy who really, 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 really related to that particular artist, who, that particular comic book, whatever else. As long as you can find that guy, you're golden. And there's a lot of money to be made in that market. So I'm not putting that market down for a minute. But I will say that there is at least a worry that I see statistically, which I don't think it's paid enough attention to, which is that it's also possible that you're the one guy on earth who likes this thing that much. And unless you can find somebody else who likes it at least a little bit, you could be caught with, like, just something that's just, it's just dead weight in your collection or otherwise. And so I'm never super cocky about these things. I'm always happier as an investment, finding things that I can move along profitably from what I paid for it, but I can move it. So, all right, that's about all I got to say about that one. Agent Cam wants to remind everyone, hit that like button, share it with your nerd friends, please. Absolutely. Our mom wants to remind everyone also, we have a dedicated thread on the Comic Base message board where you can request live stream topics and demos. And that's about it, guys. Thank you very much, and I will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.